My name is Robert Franklin. I'm conducting an oral history with Rindetta Stewart on July 9th, 2024. The interview is being conducted on the campus of Washington State University Tri-Cities. I will be talking with Rindetta about her experiences living in the Tri-Cities. And for the record, can you state and spell your full legal name for us?
Rindetta, middle name Delancy, last name Stewart, Stewart.
Great. Um, quick background before we start. Did you ever work at the Hanford site?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
For Battelle Northwest.
Okay, great. Let's start before that. Let's start about your life before Hanford. So where and when were you born? And where
Uh,
did you live before coming to the Tri-Cities?
I lived in Yakima before coming to the Tri-Cities. But if you want to know where I was born in Altimer, Althéimer, Arkansas. And I'm a child of parents who were part of the Great Southern Migration from the South to the North.
And where did your parents migrate to?
My parents migrated from Arkansas to Tacoma, and from Tacoma, my mother worked at Hanford, and prior to her working at Hanford, her father worked at Hanford when they were building buildings at Hanford to um, get ready to build the atomic energy bomb.
And so this was during the Manhattan Project. They were
Yes,
part of the World War II migration.
yes, he was recruited by DuPont
Okay.
to come out west, and so he came to Hanford and worked there.
What do you know, if anything, about his job, his work experience at the Hanford site?
He was like a construction worker, and at that particular time, there were hardly any grocery stores or department stores, and so they would have to travel into Pasco for their supplies. But he also earned money on the side by uh, doing laundry for the workers and cooking. He was a great cook.
Okay.
And so he made extra money. And with the extra money, he would send it back to Arkansas to my grandmother so she could build a brand new home.
And this is your mother's father
Father,
and
yes.
mother. Okay. What did your mother do at Hanford?
My mother worked with my grandfather, and I'm not exactly sure what she did. I don't know if she helped with the cooking or whatever, but she was there for a while. When she first came from Arkansas, she stayed in Tacoma, and he decided, or she decided, that going to Hanford, they would make more money than living in Tacoma because DuPont was paying a fairly decent wage at that time.
Yes, yeah, they were. They were forced to pay equal wages to whites and
Right,
blacks for the same thing for the same work.
right.
Do you know how long they stayed at Hanford?
My grandfather, I believe, was there from 1942 until the early 50s. Yes. He decided not to live here because he would have a large family to bring. And once people who had been recruited by DuPont had finished the jobs they'd been recruited for, they used to call it the wind that would blow them into East Pasco. And that became the segregated part from living in Hanford to go to East Pasco. And that's how East Pasco was formulated, basically out of workers who had been brought south to help build Hanford.
Right. Black workers.
Black
Right.
workers,
For
yes. Oh,
yeah.
yes. Uh-huh.
Right. Did your grandfather ever talk about the racial environment of Hanford or the Tri Cities?
No, he did not. And I believe that was because he was born and reared in the South, and that was not a thing you could approach white people about in the South.
Right.
And so when he came north, he would work with white people or do what he had to do, but he did not talk about it. But my mother talked about it to the point where before she left Arkansas, she left us with her mother, my brother and sister and I. And when she was in Hanford and in Tacoma, she said it was a better place to live because if she stayed in the South, she said she would probably get killed because she was very outspoken about how she was treated as a black woman. And she said she was not going to scrub and clean houses all of her life. And so we stayed with my grandmother a few years. I can't remember how many years, but when she got settled, she came back and brought us north. And we were in that migration. And I can remember clearly when we were on the train coming north, when the Pullman porter announced on the train, he said, "We have now crossed the Mason-Dixon line, and now all of you coloreds can go and eat in the dining room." It was a segregated car where you had to sit. And of course, people brought food with them to sit in that segregated car.
Right.
And so I remember crossing the Mason-Dixon line. It was interesting. And I was just about 11 years old at that time.
What a powerful yet arbitrary force.
That's right. That's right.
So where did your mother bring you when you first came north? Was it to Hanford or
Yakima, Washington.
Yakima? And what drew your mother to Yakima?
What brought my mother to
Yes,
Yakima?
yeah.
She met this fine man that I call my dad, and she got married. And so when she got married, she came and got her children.
Okay.
And
He lived in Yakima?
he lived in Yakima.
Okay.
He lived in Yakima.
What first what struck you about the differences between Altimer and Yakima when you first got there?
Altimer was all black. Um, we went to school. I went to school those first few years. I started school when I was 4 years old. I was in first grade because all the children that would walk past our house every morning, I wanted to know where they were going. They said they were going to school, and I would cry if my mom wouldn't let me go with them. So finally the teacher says, "Oh yeah, send her on." And so I went to the first grades when I was in Altimer. And then when we moved to Yakima, I went to Barge, and now it's Barge Lincoln, I believe. And it was interesting because the classroom was full of white kids, and they would look at us, and we would look at them, and we didn't talk, we didn't say anything because we had not been accustomed to doing that kind of thing growing up in the South. And while we were at Barge at that time, they would give us a goiter pill every day. Everybody had to take a goiter pill. And after a while on the playground and doing double Dutch jump rope, all the kids could do that. And so that's how we began to mix slowly with white children. My sister had a lot of fear about being around white folks. I'm not sure where my fear came in or if it ever did. And my brother was small enough where I don't know if he was ever fearful or not, but there was things about being around white folks that was very different to us.
What's the age range of your siblings? How much older or younger are they than you?
My brother passed when he was 77 years old. My sister is now 87, and I'm a little past 89.
So you're the oldest of the.
I'm the eldest of all of them, but I had a sister who died before I did.
So So, do you remember what year you came to Yakima?
We came to Yakima in 1946.
Yeah, so right after the war.
Mm-hmm.
And what did your mother and your the man you call your father? What did they do? In yeah, what where did they work?
When we came to Yakima, my father worked in a restaurant uh, that is Front Street. I think that's where the mission is now. But there was a restaurant there where blacks could go, and it was called the Base Hit Cafe. One of them was called the Base Hit Cafe, and I can't remember what the name of the other one was. And then my mother was a waitress in another restaurant for a Greek gentleman, Mr. Papantis. And so they both worked on Front Street as cooks and waiters.
In the service industry.
Hmm.
Oh, I wanted to back up. What was your grandfather that worked at Hanford? What was his name?
William Robinson.
William Robinson.
Hmm.
And what was your mother's name?
Monzella, Montzella.
And same last name, or Robinson, or
Yes.
okay.
My mother was Delancey, but grandfather was Robinson.
Oh, your mother's last name was Delancey.
Mother's last name was Delancey. Hmm. But she and my father divorced because my father didn't want to come west or whatever. There was a time when I was growing up that young people were not involved in adults' conversation.
Right. That still exists in some ways.
Yes, it
Yeah.
does.
Um, what was the you mentioned a little bit about it at school. What was the racial environment like in Yakima in the 1946 when you got there? What did you experience? Did you ever hear your parents talking about anything regarding the racial environment?
My mother was quick to let us know that we were in the North, and if white people tried to insult us, we had a right to respond to them. And that just because what they may call you, that is not what you are. You're just as important as they are, and we heard that all the time. And in grade school, I had a good grade school teacher. I don't know if she was Italian or not, but at that time we used to have our hair braided, and we would wear ribbons. We call them bow ribbons. You tie the ribbon on your hair, and you go to school like that. And I can remember one kid trying to dip the ribbon in the inkwell. The desk used to have inkwells on them, and you had pens that you learned cursive writing, which is not taught anymore. But in grade school it was fine, but in middle school, um, I went to Washington Junior High, which is now Washington Middle School. It was really a lot of racial slurs um, going on all the time. It was with students. It was basically with students. Um, Teachers, um, they would they would say things, but it wasn't quite a slur. It would say, well, I hope you colored kids, hope you colored kids are keeping up with everybody else. That was at Washington Middle School. And I can remember we had an earthquake, and I was in choir, and we were standing on risers, and you'd stand on the risers, and the lights were swaying forth and back, and our music teacher says, "Oh, everybody's singing so well. Everybody's singing so well." And I think it was Mrs. Curtis. She said, "Now, and I want you colored kids to sing just hard like you people know how to sing. Your people know how to sing." And so we went home and told Mother about that and my dad. And she said, what? And my dad said, I hope I don't have to go to that school to talk to her. He said, people who sing, sing. Doesn't have to do anything with how you look. And then from there, I went to, it was Yakima High School, now Davis. And that was really, that was an awful time because I was a teenager. There were not young black men in my class. You know, you want to date somebody. Kids are always dating and writing little notes and stuff. There was not a lot of that going on. I had a recruiter from the Army that came to our school on certain days trying to recruit kids when they graduated from high school. And so I was interested in that. I thought, gee, Army, that sounds good, because he had given this long speech about what you could do and what you could learn and go on to, and get a higher education and what the pay was. And that sounded good. And so when it came my turn to be interviewed by him, he sat and went through the interview. And he told me, I'm so sorry. He said, you could never be in the Army because we don't have skirts long enough for you. So I have to turn you down. And then at that time, and I think they still call them counselors in the high schools, Miss Picard, Alma Picard, and I think her picture is still hanging in the hallways at Davis. She said to me when I was getting ready to graduate, she said, you've been such a nice girl. She called me into her office. You've been such a nice girl. And you're always clean and you smell good every day you come to school. And when you graduate from high school, she said, our farmers like smart colored girls. And I'm going to get you a job when you graduate working for the best apple growing family in the Yakima Valley. That was the kind of counseling I got in high
Wow,
school.
what a prize.
Pardon?
I said, wow, what a prize.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was it. My father became angry, and then I had a social studies teacher, Mr. Sebastian. He decided that he needed to deal with slavery. Let's just talk about slavery. We got somebody in here that just looks like the slaves. And he had a large family because when he wore his shoes, his toe was coming out of the top of his shoes. He said, and those slaves that didn't want to stay in their place, we've got to keep those kind of people in their place. No matter how old you get, keep them in their place. These colored people will take over if you don't keep them in their place. You see them picking cotton in these, see there, they're picking cotton. They're doing what they're told to do, and that's what they ought to do. Social studies in high school, getting ready to graduate. Mr. Sebastian.
Not surprised.
No.
No.
And when I left high school, then I went to YVC. I got a couple of scholarships from two black women's clubs and went to YVC. And I got married while I was at YVC. And
And who was that
that was to Herb Jones.
Herb Jones. So that's where he kind of ended.
Herb Jones Sr. Or Herbert Jones Sr. Herbert A. Jones Sr.
How did you two come to the Tri-Cities area?
How did I come to the Tri-Cities?
Yeah.
When I got married, he was working for Larson's Bakery, and I can't remember the name of the drugstore. And he, you know, it was a good job if you could get a job as a janitor if you were black.
That's what others have mentioned.
Yeah, you could.
I think Dallas Barnes called it the difference between working outside and inside.
That's right. That's right. yeah, those were good jobs if you get a job working like that. And so he did that for so long, and then after I had met him at YVC, and he had finished course work at YVC and still working these janitorial positions, we decided because he had been in the Army and he could get GI Bill money that he would commute from Yakima to Central in Ellensburg. You know, it was Central Washington State College before it became Central Washington State University. And so he commuted forth and back, and that's where he got his degree in economics.
And you went to school at Central as well?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yes, I went to Central as well.
And what did you graduate? Did you
Graduated
get a degree?
from
And what
Central.
was your degree in?
And psychology and sociology.
Psych and social.
Mm-hmm.
And
As well, I went on to graduate study, but yeah, I went to Central, and I worked at Central.
oh, did you get a graduate degree at Central as well?
No, I got a graduate degree at Pacific Lutheran University
Oh, and what was that in?
in counseling, psychology, and sociology.
Wow. And how did you guys end up in Tri-Cities?
We came to Tri-Cities because Hanford was paying more money than 2 jobs as a janitor.
Yeah.
And so that's how we got that job. And see, I
And was that Herb's job?
Herb, that was Herb. Okay. And when I was married to Herb, I made the national news being the first black telephone operator for Bell Telephone in the state of Washington. And I'm trying to think, David Brinkley, I think it was on the David Brinkley show. That was all over. And my mother called me one night and she said, "Sis, why don't you change your dresses? Every time that's on TV, you have on the same dress." I said, "Mom, it's the same story. They're just playing it all over again." Well, it was interesting. My friends I'd gone to high school with kept telling me, "You can get a job working at the telephone company." But in the meantime, on his shifting, I could work at the cannery, Del Monte Cannery, but I could only work where you put the fruit on the belt, not where you can it. Because the woman who was the floor lady said that blacks couldn't put their hands on the fruit to can it. We could only prepare it to go down the belt to be canned. And so my girlfriend said, "Oh, well, everybody cans fruit. Why can't you can fruit?" I said, "They won't let me can fruit." And so that's when I called in the Washington State Board Against Discrimination. Washington State Board Against Discrimination came in to the cannery and they made observation about how all of that was being handled. And so they said, "You will either pay her what the highest person on the line that's canning is earning, or you will give her a job to can, where you put the fruit." And so it was interesting because a lot of my friends who were black didn't want me to go to the State Board Against Discrimination because they felt they would lose their jobs.
There'd be retaliation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, they knew there would be retaliation because they said Frances will do this. Frances was the floor lady. I said, "Well, I don't care what Frances does. I have nothing to do with that." But anyway, I stayed there that whole season. And then my friend said, after canning season was over, that's when I went to apply for Bell Telephone and got the job at Bell Telephone. But they did not want to hire me downtown. It used to be, in order to get a telephone, you would have to go and sit at a desk, fill out the forms, your earnings, your name, everything before they assigned you a telephone, and then they would give you a telephone. There were no black women there. I think it was on 2nd or 3rd Street where their office used to be. And so they told me, no, you go up to traffic. And that's where you say, operator, may I help you? And so I went to traffic. No, we're not hiring. And my friends, this is high school, from Davis High School, we all went to school together. They said, they're hiring all the time. We don't want to be called in on double shifts. Can't you get a babysitter? I said, well, yeah. So I went back, no, we're not hiring. So I called the Washington State Board Against Discrimination again. They went up. They had to hire me. Well, the first thing they said to me, yeah, we'll hire her, but she has to take a bath every day. We don't want her to come in here smelling up the place. She has to take a bath every day, shave her legs, and she has to use deodorant. That's what she said to me. And another one of the women that was there said, but you scored 100% on the test. Nobody, you're the first person that ever came up here that got 100. They give you names of cities and towns in the state of Washington. Nobody's ever done that before. How come they said that to you? These are friends from high school. Well, when they told me what I had to do, well, I guess I was what they would consider a bit flip. I said, you mean to tell me I have to work with people who don't do that, who don't bathe, shave their legs, and use deodorant? And so she looked at me, we'll take you. Well, in 6 months, I became a supervisor. In 6 months at Bell Telephone. And that building is still on Yakima Avenue, that brown brick building. And I can remember my operator number as well as my name, 101. And they would let me in the building, go upstairs, and that's what I say. Operator, may I help you, please? Mm-hmm.
What job did Herb get at Hanford that caused you to move down here?
He was in the department where they had to supply all the metal and sheet work and everything for the buildings. And I forgot what that was called. I don't remember what it was called, but that was his job. He had to make sure every building had whatever they needed. That was his job.
Do you remember roughly what year that was that you guys relocated to?
63.
63.
1963.
Where did you first live when you came to the Tri-Cities?
Jadwin Avenue, Jadwin Apartments.
In Richland?
In Richland. That was segregated.
How so?
Well, we found out all the black people who were recruited to Richland, who came to Richland to work at Hanford, and particularly people with educations from historically black colleges and universities, we were all put on one end of the apartments. And we found that out by our friend who was Robert Jackson, an attorney that had moved here from Virginia, a black man. And he had gone into the wrong building just by accident. He said he was tired. And so he just went in and sat down. And he said he started looking around in the living room, and that wasn't his house. And so he said he got up and got out of there. And then he started walking through those apartments. They're still on Jadwin. He said all the black folks were in one section. It was segregated.
It's very interesting because you always hear when talking about race historically in the Tri-Cities, people will often say that, they'll often point out, right, that Richland was not like Kennewick or Pasco. It wasn't explicitly segregated.
Well, I think the reason that was always said is because the people they were recruiting were far more educated out of black colleges, and it was hidden. It was hidden. It was hidden. But the A houses, the B houses, the C houses, whatever, and all of that but I think it was very hidden. And Richland created East Pasco. When, well, when you finished a particular job, when they were building, well, Hanford, I'm saying, Hanford created East Pasco. When those jobs were finished and people didn't want to go back south or wherever they came from, we always said the wind always blew the blacks over into East Pasco. That's where they lived. I worked at Hanford a while.
Right.
And you know, in the summer, I left. I worked for computer sciences for a while.
This was at Battelle.
It became a part of Battelle, I think.
Okay.
But I worked for computer sciences. I left the telephone company. I worked for Bell Telephone 10 years with no absentees. That had never happened. And then I went to work for computer sciences. And from computer sciences, they asked me to come and work for Battelle Northwest. And I went to Battelle. And at that time, I don't know what the show was, but Ronald Reagan wanted to tour the Hanford site.
General Electric Theater.
General Electric Theater.
Yep.
But he told the man I worked for, just like we're sitting here, he said, I want to tour it, but I don't want no niggers taking me around out here. And I heard this just as sure as I'm sitting here today. And that was just like, we're all family. He didn't break his voice or nothing. But,
Well, he's not exactly a civil rights warrior.
no.
What was the racial temperature attitude in Richland? You mentioned kind of an informal segregation into the Jadwin apartments. What was the work and kind of social environment like in Richland when you got here for you as an African American?
There wasn't much social life. The social life really for people who wanted to dance or hear good dance music, maybe some jazz music, went to Pasco. And Wallace Webster's uncle owned a nightclub in East Pasco. And that's where people would go. But I don't remember doing a lot of social anything in Richland. The thing I did in Richland was, we had been there, I guess, so-called early. People would always say, well, if you go to Rindy and Herb's house, she'll cook. She cooks for everybody. Everybody that comes, she cooks. You can go there and get a good meal. And so I don't remember doing anything really socially.
How did you feel out and about? You know, when you had to run errands or, you know, kind of in Richland. You know, were there any moments that stood out to you?
One moment stood out to me. Most times, I had a lot of white girlfriends who were true civil rights workers. So one of their husbands didn't get fired. Do
you remember their names?
Norman and Shirley Miller.
Mm-hmm. We interviewed Shirley.
Did you?
Years ago, yeah.
Oh.
And her son Andy, yeah.
Andy. And Andy's brother and my son are good friends. And Phyllis Bowersock and her husband, the Millers, Nyland Digbruns.
I interviewed their daughter.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
Okay. And well, I can't remember, but
the Nyland Ron's daughter gave me all of her mother's minutes from CORE.
Congress of Racial Equality.
Super invaluable for me in writing the book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Congress of Racial Equality.
Yeah.
That was Roy Innes. Stokely Carmichael was SNCC.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you kind of had a group of kind of social justice minded people, civil
Forever.
rights warriors.
Forever. Forever. What is so interesting that I found out recently, my children's great grandfather was an activist long before, maybe before we were born or when I was young, before I married Herb Jones. He was an activist wanting desegregation to take place all over the state. And that was Reverend Reed out of Spokane.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, Calvary, right?
Calvary Baptist is
Yep.
still there.
Yep.
He spoke with the Supreme Justice, the black Supreme Court judge,
Thurgood Marshall.
Thurgood Marshall, and with President Kennedy to talk about how important it was to pass the Civil Rights Bill. And that was a long time ago, but the church is still standing.
How actively involved were you with civil rights organizations here in the Tri-Cities?
Real active. Real active.
Which one? You were in CORE,
Uh-huh.
right? And others?
SNCC, and then I was a secretary for NAACP. And then there was a man in Pasco, Mr. McGee. He always carried his sign about discrimination in the stores and all here on the streets in Pasco. Yeah, I was active, very active. Everybody that came and ate at my house, if they didn't say the right stuff, I had to help kind of indoctrinate them.
What were the main focuses of the civil rights movement here in the Tri-Cities?
I think the main focus was equality, and that was not happening even though people who had been recruited to come to the Tri-Cities were never treated equally in housing, wages, or in schools. Now, Dr. Wiley, who helped to get this campus here,
Bill Wiley.
Bill Wiley, and his wife Myrtle, she was a school teacher, and she could talk about what happened in the schools, but those were the things. One thing I remember, having bought a bouquet of flowers, I don't know what store it was at, and I paid for them. I gave the cashier the money, and in her hand, instead of her giving me back the change in my hand, she slammed it down on the counter. She said, "There's your change." But
What were some of the specific targets of civil rights activism? And what were some of the victories, like specific targets and kind of victories that you remember?
one of the big victories was when Carl Maxey came to Pasco. There was a grocery store in Pasco where everybody black shopped at that grocery store because that was the only one there.
Was it the East Side Market, that one? Or
I think it was East Side Market. But they would not hire anybody black. Nope. You could shop there, but you could not work there. So what we all did, the Brunses, the Millers, and a bunch of us that they call militants, we went one day, I think Nyla and I went one day and counted up all the grocery carts that they had. And so then we went out and got that number of people who wanted to have grocery carts. And we boycotted them for about 16 to 20 days. When my shift was over, I would give it to the next black person. When that person's shift was over, we would give it to the next black person. We would always put something in the basket that would not spoil. Can of tomatoes, whatever, beans, whatever, and just roll around in the market. Just roll around in the market.
Make it look like you're shopping, but...
Yeah, we were shopping, but we were boycotting.
Right.
That's what we were doing. And Carl Maxey came out of Spokane to speak to that.
What was the situation for African Americans like in Kennewick when you arrived? And what?
When I arrived in Kennewick, We were the first black family that bought and owned property in Kennewick. We paid down on the property, and it went through what we offered. The offer went through, and we moved into the house at 714 South Hartford, March the 22nd, 1966. And 2 weeks after we moved in, I think 2 weeks, I want to say 2 weeks, but I'll say shortly after we moved into that house, our telephone wires were all cut, chopped up, cut. We had bought a brand new Ford at that time. All the tires were cut. Okay? The Miller children, the Bruns children, all the kids were playing together, and just what kids do. They were in the swimming pool in Kennewick, and some adults got in the pool to try and drown my children and all the white kids who played with my kids. And it just so happened that the lifeguard, I don't even remember who it was, saw what was going on, called the police, and stopped all of that. But we were promised cross burning, and we had a family that lived on 2 houses from us. He taught at Kennewick High School. He resigned from teaching at Kennewick High School because he said, I'm not going to teach no coons, no apes, Africans, and niggers in my classroom. He left Kennewick High and went to Columbia Basin College to teach. I can't remember his name. And they put a cross, X, a yellow X. I don't know how they got that on top of our house. So it was marked where we lived by the police department. But my children, when they went to Fruitland Elementary School, had to be taken to school by white police officers, and I was fearful because I didn't know if the police officers were part of whatever else was going on with us, because I just didn't know who had done all of this. And when I lived in Kennewick, see, I was still working for Bell Telephone. I had to go across that old wooden bridge. There was an old bridge that I had to cross to get to the telephone company in Pasco.
You're talking about the Green Bridge?
Yeah. Well, Wallace Webster and Raymond Avery used to stand there to make sure these folks who had threatened to shoot me that lived in Kennewick. Because see, Kennewick was known as the sundown town. And if you were black and you went to Kennewick and you weren't out before sundown, they would beat you back across that bridge. And so when I worked for the telephone company, you have all kinds of hours. And so they were like my guards. Wally's still living.
He is. Yeah, I actually interviewed him years ago, and he mentioned
did you?
escorting you across the bridge.
Oh, yes, he did. Yes, he did. It was horrible. And a few years later, while we were living on Hartford, they found a big ammunition cache, buried up about a half a block from our house. But people had promised to come to burn us out. They were going to burn us out.
Do you remember the sign on the Green Bridge? Did you ever, because it's interesting, we've never found any photographic evidence.
I wish I had.
But I mean, clearly
There
the
was
sentiment
a
existed because everybody mentions the feeling.
Yeah, there was a sign, but I never had it picked. I guess if I looked in some old albums, I may have that.
That'd be amazing. I've never seen it. I've never been able to locate a photo of it. I mean, it clearly exists because.
Oh, it did.
Because, or at least the feeling that it was meant to.
Oh yeah.
To instill is instilled.
Oh yeah. And see, Judge Jack Tanner was one of the people who marched down Kennewick Avenue because at that time he was the NAACP president. And
He famously called Kennewick the Birmingham of Washington.
Birmingham of the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
Yes, he did. And I can remember sending my kids to Albertson in Kennewick to buy grapes. Well, they sent home all the grapes that had fallen off the stems. So I had to go back to the store, talk about the grapes. One woman says, that's that militant black woman. That's that one that stays down there that we don't want staying down here. And so I asked for the manager, and I gave him the bag of grapes and the receipt. And he said, it must have been a mistake. It must have been a mistake. I said, I'm sure it was a mistake. I'm sure it was a mistake. But Kennewick was, there were people who lived in Pasco who would not visit us in Kennewick because they thought they would be beaten out of town if they stayed after dark.
Yeah. What did you have? You mentioned Wallace Webster's Uncle's Club. What other memories do you have of East Pasco, and what did you participate in any civil rights activity in East Pasco?
Sure, all the three cities, wherever something was going on, we participated in all of that. And I cannot remember the lady's name. She had a place where when Wally's uncle closed down, we would say his joint or his juke joint, whatever. We could go to her place, and she always had fried chicken, and sweet potato pies, and she would always serve it to you in a brown paper bag. And everybody sat there and ate. Someone told me she's still alive.
Are you talking about Virginia Robinson, Virgie's Chicken Shack? Is that the one you're
No, not Virgie. I knew Virgie. No, not Virgie. But I can't remember what her name was. But we always had to go there and get fried chicken. That was her thing. That was her thing. And the churches were really alive in East Pasco. Ministers were involved in a lot of community activities also at that particular time. And Art Fletcher lived in East Pasco. And Art left and went to D.C. And of course they were my good friends, Art and Bernice. And it was just hard to put your finger on things. Miss Katie Barton, she worked at Bonneville Dam, counting fish that would go over the dam or the whatever they called it. She was always a good person, but there were always a lot of threats, but you couldn't find out who was threatening, who was making the threats. Now in Richland, my friends and I, in those days they had these Ford station wagons with the wooden panels on the side. We could put the kids in there with a little sandwich and something to drink and all. And they had these little fish ponds in the yard with this little black kid sitting with the fishing pole in the front yard. And so when it got about 11 o'clock at night and the kids were awake, we would take black spray paint and go spray the little boys who were fishing black. People would wake up and wonder what was happening in their neighborhood. And I can't remember another time the John Birchers had somebody from the South come and I can't remember his name, but the John Birchers had someone to come to Richland and I would picket. I was walking the picket line. As a matter of fact, I worked for a man who came along the picket line and looked me straight in the face and spit in my face. And I kept on working for him. You know, if you're trained to work on the picket line, you don't respond.
Right.
You know, and you don't wear loose clothing where somebody can drag you, and you don't let your hair where people can drag you. You know, you have to be ready to hold your own on the picket line. He would spit in my face, and I would go back to work in his office. My desk faced him. About 2 or 3 months later, he said to me one day, "I want to talk to you." I said, "Sure." He said, "Everything I've done when you walked that picket line, you've never said anything to me about it." I said, "Well, I never had a job working for you on the picket line. I stayed at Hanford long enough to see them take him out in a straitjacket. I drove him crazy." I never said anywhere. I drove him absolutely crazy.
How I've met your son Herbert.
Yes.
How many other children did you have?
One daughter.
One daughter.
Sabrina. She's a registered nurse for 43 years. She's a University of Washington graduate.
And they both grew up here. How long did you live in the Tri-Cities for?
Until, oh goodness, 60, I want to say 60, 80, 90, 68, 69.
Okay.
Somewhere out there.
And how come you moved on?
So that their dad could finish his college degree
Okay.
in Ellensburg. The Oregonian had, I don't know how to get that, but if you can get an Oregonian, they printed, again, this radical woman, militant me, they printed me up in the Oregonian back in the 60s. But there's something in the Oregonian about the Joneses and the Jones woman. But I don't remember the year, and I've got things packed away, and I don't know where it is, but.
So I might be able to find it online.
You may be able to. Maybe I'll give Herb that job.
That'd be great. That sounds like a good job for her. So they spent some of their years here, right? Because Herb sent me the pictures.
They went to Fruitland Elementary School.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, they went to Fruitland Elementary School. And my daughter, when we went to Ellensburg, was the first black student that ever graduated from Ellensburg High School.
So you stayed in Ellensburg for quite a while.
Yeah, and then one day I needed to take Herb some of his football stuff he had forgotten. And so I went to the school, and these kids said, "Oh, hi, Miss Jones." I said, "Hi." I said, they said, "Can we help you?" I said, "I'm looking for Herb. Do you know where Herb is?" And this is the thing I shall never forget. These young kids said, "Well, what does he look like?" The only black kid, this big tall kid. "Well, what does he look like?" And I said, "You know, Herb's tall, plays on the football team and all that." "Oh, yeah, I know who that guy is." And they went on and found him. They never asked if he was black or what does he look like. That's what they asked.
What stands out to you? Seems like you had a really busy 5 years here in the Tri-Cities, right? Really busy. What stands out to you in terms of accomplishments made and kind of improving, challenging the segregation in the Tri-Cities and improving the community?
More jobs. People began to move out of some of the government housing. Some of the housing had opened up. There were more, I think there were as many white folks in the civil rights movement here as there were black folks in the civil rights movement. Um, and that made a difference because I don't know the name of the group I organized, but once a month there were all of us who got together, black and white, and we had dinner together, and we would discuss children or what went on the job or what was going on in the city or who was in jail or not in jail, that kind of thing. And I don't remember the young lady's name after they did not want to hire me in Pasco now at the telephone company. They didn't want to hire me, but they had to hire me. And there was another young lady that came, and I think her name was, her last name was Daniels. She married one of the Daniels that lives in East Pasco. And she went on to Spokane to become a black judge. But she had moved here, I think, from Alabama. But I can't remember, but after that, I don't think they hired anybody else that was black to work for the telephone company. Um, the other thing, um, people felt more comfortable in some housing areas or in restaurants than they had before. Um, Sometimes people would go into a restaurant to order food and it was never served. The, the cook went off shift. um, and the children, now my son and Stanley Miller, that's Andy's brother, if you could count on anybody to carry the signs, Stanley and my son Herb, they carried the signs about discrimination. Those, they were in charge of those. But I'm trying to think other changes. See, I still think there's just a lot of things that people know they don't want to talk about fear. I often wonder what the fear is all about. I can remember having come to Pasco, Washington, when I was at Central to do recruiting of high school students. And the police was called on me because I was that militant black woman. They didn't want me in that school. I can remember that clearly. And little did we know that school would be named after Miss Virgie Robinson.
Well, is there anything else that you wanted to mention about
My
just your,
children had
your life here and then, anything about living in the Tri-Cities and working at Hanford?
my children had a lot of good exposure to people like Stokely Carmichael and Roy Ennis and Louis Lomax and some of the greats who were civil rights people who would come into our home and give us a national perspective on what was going on because, see, my husband and I were totally involved in this. People who would come to the Tri-Cities, find the Joneses, they know. Go over there, she'll cook, they know, they'll tell you. And so, um, I never will forget when Haley wrote his book, and he sat in my living room. I don't even know if that was in the book. He said to us, He said, if you don't ever, Alex said to us, if you don't ever remember anything, remember that the worst thing that white folks ever did for black folks was to teach them how to read.
You said Haley. Do you mean Alex Haley?
Alex Haley.
The
Hmm.
Roots. Okay.
Yeah, that did Roots.
Yeah.
He said that was the worst thing white folks ever did was to teach black folks how to read. We're still reading. We're still reading. But it's amazing. There's a lot I don't understand why it's happening, but I guess I understand it, but I just don't really want to accept it. You would think that some things ought to be behind you. Um, and I can remember my grandparents picking cotton in Arkansas, and I can just remember so much, and that crossing that Mason-Dixon line, and um, it's just, I don't know. It's just, it's just so many things.
Well, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for this interview, for all of the work you've done. You've clearly left a mark. When I started this project back in 2017 with the funding from the National Park Service, but really my main community partner was Access, the African American Community Cultural and Education Society, and I worked really closely with Leonard Moore and Vanessa, and Vanis Daniels, and one of the people one of the names that kept coming up in interviews with Wally and Ricky Robinson and others was Herman Rindetta. And it's amazing to me that you were only here for 5 years to have, and so for you to say, well, people always said go to Herman Rindetta, well, people were saying that to me, and so you've really made an outsized mark, and it was my pleasure to interview you today.
My pleasure to be here. God is good all the time. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you. This was really amazing.